Clara Hayes had always lived on the quiet edges of the city, where the hum of traffic was softened by distance, and where her world was defined less by sound and more by sight and touch. At 24, she carried herself with a certain grace that came not from wealth or glamour, but from years of learning how to move carefully, to read lips, to interpret gestures, and to design beauty on a screen, even when the music behind it remained unreachable. She was deaf from birth, and for most of her life she had accepted that the world of music belonged to others. She worked as a graphic designer part-time for a small community music foundation, creating posters and brochures that announced concerts she could not hear. For Clara, it was enough to know that what she made with her hands helped others find joy. One Thursday morning, her supervisor stopped by her desk smiling too widely. Clara looked up from the poster she was finishing and caught only the last words on his lips, "Gala invitation." Before she could process it, two colleagues chimed in, their voices carrying that false sweetness she had come to recognize. They waved a glittering envelope in front of her, mouthing clearly enough that she could understand. "You designed the poster for the music gala, so you should be there. You deserve it." Clara hesitated. She had never stepped inside such a grand event, much less one where every note of a symphony would hang in the air, unheard by her ears. She signed slowly, unsure if they would even understand. "I do not think I should go." But one of them laughed and pressed the envelope into her hand. "Come on, Clara, it will be fun. You belong there." She wanted to believe them. She wanted to believe this was kindness. Yet as she stood before her small mirror that Saturday night, adjusting the simple navy blue dress she had borrowed from her cousin, her stomach twisted. She knew too well the smirks people hid when they thought she could not hear. She knew the jokes whispered about the deaf girl at the music foundation. The hotel glowed with chandeliers and polished marble. Couples in gowns and tuxedos streamed inside. Clara walked carefully across the carpet, her heels awkward but steady, her hands clutching the strap of her bag as if it could protect her. The ballroom was immense, filled with the clink of glasses and the faint rustle of expensive fabric. She felt every pair of eyes flick toward her, then away, dismissing her presence. Her colleagues waved her to their table near the stage. She sat quietly scanning the lips of people around her, catching fragments of conversation she wished she had not. Does she even know what is happening? How odd to invite her. She should have stayed home. When the orchestra began, Clara felt the vibrations in her chest, subtle yet real, but she could not follow the melody that made the crowd sigh in admiration. She sipped her water, trying to focus on the lights reflecting off the golden instruments. Behind her, one colleague leaned to another lips, forming the cruel words she read too clearly. She cannot even hear what they are playing. A ripple of laughter spread at their table. Another colleague lifted his hand in an exaggerated motion, waving at Clara as if inviting her to stand and clap along. She blinked unsure, then realized it was a performance meant to provoke. When she did not move, their laughter grew louder, poorly masked behind napkins. A few guests from neighboring tables glanced over, eyes narrowing with disdain. Clara lowered her gaze, her chest tight, her hands trembling in her lap. She told herself to endure until it ended, to vanish quietly without tears. But the shame pressed too heavily, her solitude exposed under the glittering lights. And then a shadow fell across her table. A tall man in a black tailored suit slid into the empty chair beside her. His presence alone silenced the snickers. Clara turned her head startled. His features were sharp, his expression unreadable. His gray eyes fixed with an intensity that seemed to cut through the crowded hall. Damien Cross. She recognized him instantly. Even someone who lived apart from the noise of headlines knew the name. Billionaire CEO in the world of music media. A man whispered about as cold, ruthless, unreachable. He did not acknowledge the others. He leaned closer to Clara, his movements deliberate, his hands lifted, forming shapes she had not expected to see in such a place. In clear, precise sign language, he told her 3 words. "I hear you." Clara's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the ballroom vanished, the laughter dissolved, and only those 3 words remained. Her eyes burned tears threatening to spill. Someone had spoken to her not with pity, not with mockery, but with recognition. She stared at him, shaken to the core. Damien's gaze did not soften, yet there was something steady in it, as if he had decided in that moment to stand between her and the cruelty surrounding her. The table was silent now, her colleagues shifting uncomfortably, their laughter strangled in their throats. Clara's fingers brushed the edge of her glass. She wanted to sign something back, but her hands trembled. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time that night, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt heard even in a world where sound had never belonged to her. For the rest of the performance, Clara sat rigid in her chair, her pulse unsteady, trying to understand why the most powerful man in the room had chosen to intervene. Damien Cross remained beside her, his posture composed and commanding. But when guests approached, he acted as if his presence at her side was natural, even expected. At one point, a woman in a glittering red gown leaned down her lips, forming the words Clara could read easily. "I did not know you brought someone tonight." Damien looked up calmly, his voice low but firm, and said aloud, while sliding his hand lightly across the back of Clara's chair, "She is with me." The words were not shouted, yet they rippled across the table like a decree. Her colleagues froze, their earlier amusement smothered by disbelief. The rest of the night, Clara could feel their stares, no longer mocking, but confused, even envious. When the gala finally ended and guests began to file out into the grand lobby, Damien guided Clara gently toward the exit. She followed in silence, her heart still shaken by the strange shift of fate. Outside, the air was cool, the city lights reflecting off the sleek cars waiting at the curb. A chauffeur opened the door of a black Bentley, and Damien motioned for Clara to step inside. She hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape, but something in his gaze kept her from refusing. Inside the car, the leather seats felt too rich beneath her hands. She sat stiffly watching as Damien settled across from her. His face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on her with a weight that made her want to shrink, yet also held her in place. He lifted his hands again, and she focused intently. "You wonder why I helped you?" She nodded slightly, her throat tight. His fingers moved with practiced certainty. "I had my reasons. First, because cruelty should never be left unanswered. Second, because you can help me as much as I helped you tonight." Clara frowned, her lips forming silently. "Help you?" He gave a faint nod, speaking aloud this time, so the driver would not misunderstand the silence. "There are rumors circulating. Shareholders whisper, the press speculates. They think something must be wrong, because I appear alone everywhere. No wife, no companion, no partner. It makes them restless. His gray eyes studied her closely. Tonight you gave me an idea. If you stand by me, even pretend, it will silence the noise. Clara's heart pounded. Pretend. The word twisted strangely inside her. She signed slowly, uncertain. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend. Damien inclined his head slightly. Call it a performance, nothing more. You get protection from people who mock you. I get distance from rumors and setups. Both of us win. Clara shook her head quickly, signing back with trembling fingers. I cannot. People will see through me. They will know I do not belong in your world. His eyes softened only a fraction, the briefest crack in the icy wall. You underestimate yourself. I have watched enough tonight to know you can play the part. And he added his hands, pausing as his voice fell lower. I once had someone who spoke this language with me every day. She is gone now. I thought I would never use it again. But tonight I saw you. I heard you. Something in Clara's chest broke open at those words. She imagined the kind of loss that could carve such stillness into a man's face. She wanted to ask about the woman, but the sharpness in his jaw warned her not to press. Instead, she signed carefully, "Why me?" His lips curved almost imperceptibly. "Why not you?" The car glided through the streets, carrying them deeper into the night. Clara looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. A simple girl from the community foundation, suddenly entangled in the orbit of a man who lived on magazine covers. She felt like she should refuse escape before it was too late. Yet another voice whispered inside her, reminding her of the humiliation at the gala, the way he had silenced their laughter with only 3 words. For once, she had not been alone. Damien leaned forward slightly, his tone measured. I am not asking for forever, only until it is no longer necessary. When that time comes, you can walk away with no ties. Until then, you will stand beside me, and I will make sure no one dares to laugh at you again. Clara stared at him, her hands clenched together on her lap. Her instincts screamed to be cautious, to protect herself, but her heart remembered the flicker of warmth when he signed to her in front of everyone. Slowly, she lifted her hands, the movement hesitant but clear. All right, I will try. Damien inclined his head once more, a gesture that carried the weight of a contract signed. Then he sat back, the faintest glimmer of something unreadable in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction. The car rolled to a stop in front of her small apartment building. The driver opened the door, but before she stepped out, Damien's voice reached her low and deliberate. Remember, Clara Hayes, it is only pretend. She turned, meeting his gaze one last time, and signed quietly. Then let us pretend well. For a moment, his expression shifted, almost a smile, before he gestured for her to go. She stepped onto the sidewalk, clutching her bag, watching as the Bentley slid back into the darkness. Alone again, she pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She had just agreed to enter a world that was not hers, to play a role she was not sure she could handle. Yet deep down beneath the fear, a spark flickered. A strange hope that maybe for once pretending might lead her to something real. Clara had never owned a gown that shimmered under chandeliers or heels that clicked elegantly across marble floors, yet a week after the gala, she found herself stepping into a boutique where the price tags alone made her breath falter. Damien had arranged everything. A stylist met her with a polite smile, guiding her to a row of dresses. Clara signed awkwardly, her voice soft when she attempted to speak. I cannot afford any of this. The stylist smiled wider and shook her head. Mr. Cross has already taken care of it. Clara felt her cheeks burn, the mix of gratitude and discomfort weighing heavy. By the night of the charity dinner, she stood before a mirror in a silver dress that hugged her slender frame. Her hair swept into a simple twist. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The driver arrived promptly, the black Bentley gleaming beneath city lights. Clara stepped in, carefully clutching a small clutch bag as though it were her only anchor. Damien sat waiting, dark suit crisp his tie, a perfect line of silk. He looked at her, once gray eyes sharp, then gave the faintest nod. "You look fine." Clara almost laughed at the understatement, but instead she signed quietly, "Thank you." He returned the gesture, his hands precise, though his gaze quickly shifted to the window. The car slid into the line of traffic, the silence between them charged, not empty. When they arrived at the grand staircase leading into the foundation hall, Clara's pulse quickened. Cameras flashed, voices swirled, reporters leaning forward. She stepped carefully, her heel catching slightly on the edge of the stone step. Her body tipped, panic rising, but in an instant, Damien's arm wrapped firmly around her waist, steadying her before she could fall. His hand remained at her side as he guided her upward. To the onlookers, it was a picture of composure, a billionaire escorting his companion with practiced ease. But to Clara, it was the jolt of his grip, the warmth of his hand that made her heart race. Inside, chandeliers scattered golden light across marble, and the hum of music vibrated faintly through the air. Clara scanned lips where she could piecing together fragments of conversation, always aware of Damien beside her. Guests greeted him, men in tailored suits, women in gowns of silk, voices laced with respect. When asked about Clara, he never faltered. "Allow me to introduce Clara Hayes," he said more than once, his voice, even his hand resting casually against her back. "My companion tonight." The word companion echoed strangely in Clara's chest. Not girlfriend, not colleague, not charity case. Companion. It carried weight without promising more than it should. Yet each time he said it, eyes widened, curiosity sparked, and Clara felt the heat of those stares pressing against her skin. During dinner, a reporter leaned close, her lips forming words that Clara caught clearly. "She is deaf, is she not? How curious. Why would the head of a music empire bring someone who cannot hear a note?" The sting of the remark pierced Clara's chest, but before she could retreat, Damien's hand found hers beneath the table. His expression remained unreadable as he lifted his free hand and signed in clear, deliberate motions for the reporter to see. "She is my harmony." The words struck Clara with such force she nearly forgot to breathe. The reporter's smile faltered, whispers spread, and suddenly the mocking eyes turned into something else, something almost reverent. Clara bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself not to cry. She tilted her head, hiding the tremble of her lips, but inside her heart was pounding a rhythm louder than any orchestra. Throughout the night, Damien remained composed, speaking to investors, greeting old acquaintances, yet always aware of her presence. Whenever she faltered, he leaned close, murmuring translations, or signed quickly to steady her. Once, when she dropped her fork and flushed crimson, he smoothly covered the sound by lifting his glass and proposing a toast, drawing all attention away from her. The act left her stunned. Was this still pretend or something else? By the time they left, cameras flashed again, catching Damien's hand, lightly guiding Clara into the car. Headlines the next morning splashed across newspapers and screens. Cold CEO attends gala with mysterious deaf woman. Speculation grew wild, and Clara sat in her small apartment, staring at the images. She could not reconcile the girl in the silver dress, smiling nervously beside a billionaire, with the woman who spent her days designing posters in a cramped office. The knock at her door startled her. When she opened it, Damien stood there unannounced, his tie loosened from the night before. He held out a newspaper, folded to the photograph of them together. His eyes met hers, unreadable, but his hands moved in steady shapes. "Do not let this frighten you, it is only noise." She signed back with hesitant fingers. "People will think it is real." He paused, then replied, "Let them." Clara's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to remind him this was an arrangement, but her voice failed her. Instead, she turned, motioning him inside. The silence of her apartment was different from the silence of the gala. Here it felt safe, intimate. Damien walked to the window, gazing out at the city, his reflection pale against the glass. Clara watched him, sensing the distance he carried, even when standing so near. She lifted her hands again, more boldly this time. "Why are you doing this, truly?" His head tilted slightly, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Because for once, someone understands the language I thought I would never use again." The admission sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to ask about the woman he had lost, about the grief that shadowed his expression. But she stopped herself. Instead, she signed softly. "I do not know if I can be what you need." He took a step closer, closing the space, until she could feel the steady weight of his presence. His voice was quiet, but his words cut deep. "You already are." Clara turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with the papers on her desk, hiding the rush of heat in her cheeks. But as he left that night, the echo of his words lingered. In the days that followed, she accompanied him to more events. At each one, she stumbled unsure, yet Damien was always there, catching her before the world could laugh. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the act of pretending began to blur into something that felt dangerously close to real. Clara never imagined her life would shift so drastically, from late nights alone at her desk designing brochures, to stepping out of sleek cars onto red carpets blinded by camera flashes that she could not hear but could feel in the vibration of the crowd. Each event Damien brought her to pulled her further into a world that felt too polished, too expensive, too far from the quiet existence she had known. The first gala after their arrangement was held at the Metropolitan Hall, a place Clara had only ever glimpsed on television. As she walked beside Damien, her heels clicking against marble, she felt the weight of every gaze. People whispered their lips, forming words she could not always catch, but the curiosity was unmistakable. Some eyes held disbelief, others jealousy, and some pity. Yet Damien's hand was steady on the small of her back, a silent reminder that she was not alone. He moved with the confidence of a man who owned the very ground beneath his feet, and when he introduced her, his words never wavered. "This is Clara Hayes, my companion." To each investor, to each guest, he repeated the same phrase with calm certainty. The more he said it, the less it sounded like pretense. Clara would smile politely, nodding her chest tight with nerves. She had grown skilled at reading lips, but in crowded rooms filled with overlapping conversations, it was exhausting, a blur of mouths she could not follow. At moments when she faltered, Damien bent his head and signed a brief summary, his movements fluid, almost invisible to others. She had never realized how seamless sign language could look when folded into natural gestures, but Damien used it like second nature. One evening, a journalist stepped forward, her lips sharp as she asked the question Clara dreaded. She cannot hear music, can she? Why would a man like you bring someone like her into the very heart of your empire? For a moment, Clara froze her breath, caught humiliation threatening to suffocate her. But Damien did not flinch. His grip on her hand tightened and he turned toward the cameras. With deliberate clarity, he raised his free hand and signed for the world to see. She is my harmony. The room stilled, cameras snapping, whispers rising. Clara felt her eyes sting, her throat ache. Harmony. The word pierced her not as an empty statement, but as something profoundly intimate. In that moment, the mockery she feared dissolved into stunned silence, and she realized Damien had not only defended her, but tied his own reputation to hers. That night, when they sat together in the car, Clara traced her fingers nervously against the leather seat, then signed in a hesitant rhythm. "You should not have said that." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" "Because people will believe it is real." He leaned back, his jaw set. "Let them." Clara turned to the window, her heart racing, her chest aching with confusion. She reminded herself it was pretend, only an arrangement. Yet the more he shielded her, the more the boundaries blurred. In the weeks that followed, she accompanied him to contract signings, to opera house receptions, to late-night dinners where powerful figures whispered deals over wine. Clara watched him work, saw how every word he spoke was measured, how every movement carried authority. He was brilliant, cold, precise, yet with her there was always that flicker of softness, a glance, a touch to steady her. A quiet sign slipped between conversations that anchored her when she felt adrift. Once at a music showcase, Clara wandered briefly away from him to admire an art display in the foyer. She leaned close to study the brush strokes, her mind tracing the rhythm of lines. Like notes on a staff, when she caught the harsh shape of a man's lips nearby. Deaf girl or charity project. Either way, she is not one of us. The cruelty cut through her. But before she could retreat, Damien was there, his presence like a wall. His eyes locked on the man, his voice steel. "If you cannot see her worth, then you have no place in my circle." The man faltered, retreating with a nervous laugh. Clara looked up at Damien, her chest trembling. She wanted to thank him, but words felt too fragile. Instead, she lifted her hands, signing softly. "You should not always defend me." He held her gaze, his gray eyes steady. "I do not defend you. I stand with you." She turned away quickly, hiding the heat in her face. But inside, something fragile and unstoppable bloomed. Every event brought new challenges, new eyes watching, but also new moments of closeness she had never expected. On the ride home from a charity auction, Clara's heel caught on the car's edge, and she stumbled forward, landing awkwardly against Damien's chest. His arm wrapped around her, instinctively holding her still for a heartbeat too long. She pulled back quickly, signing in embarrassment. "These shoes are dangerous." He smirked faintly, the expression rare and fleeting. "Then do not wear them." She laughed silently, shaking her head. "And arrive beside you in sneakers." He tilted his head, his lips curving just slightly. "I would not mind." For Clara, those brief moments were more disarming than all the grandeur around them. She returned each night to her small apartment, sitting before her laptop, staring at unfinished designs. while memories of his touch and his words replayed in her mind. She reminded herself again and again that it was only pretend, but her heart refused to listen. One afternoon, as she prepared graphics for another community event, her phone buzzed with a message from Damien's assistant. "Mr. Cross requests your presence at the signing dinner tonight." Clara sighed, closing her laptop. She knew that each invitation pulled her further into his world, a world that dazzled but also terrified her. Yet when she walked into the banquet hall that evening and felt his hand rest lightly at the small of her back, she could not deny the comfort it gave. The night ended with reporters asking again about their relationship, their lips forming endless questions. Damien ignored them all, guiding Clara toward the waiting car. Inside, as the city blurred past, she dared to sign a small joke. "You realize the press will not sleep until they name me your fiancé." His eyes flickered with something unreadable, then his lips curved faintly. Perhaps that would not be so bad. Clara stared at him, her breath caught, unsure if he was serious. He turned away before she could ask, leaving her heart pounding, her mind racing. And for the first time, she realized with frightening clarity that this performance might already be spiraling beyond her control. The further Clara stepped into Damien's world, the more she sensed that beneath his polished exterior lay shadows no spotlight could reach. He carried himself with perfect control, every movement calculated, every word measured. But there were moments when she caught something else flickering in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. One evening after a formal dinner at the Opera House, Damien suggested they leave before the curtain fell. Clara followed him out into the cool night air, the city lights shimmering across the river nearby. They walked in silence until he stopped at a quiet bridge, leaning on the stone railing. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the dark water. Clara watched him uneasy, her fingers twitching, as if to ask what weighed so heavily on him. Finally he spoke, his voice low, as though he were confessing to the night rather than to her. "My wife used to love this place." Clara blinked, startled. She had never heard him mention his wife, though the media whispered endlessly about his widowed status. Damien's expression remained calm, but his eyes carried a heaviness that unsettled her. Sophia was a pianist, brilliant. She filled every hall she entered with music. When the accident happened, everything changed. Clara's chest tightened. She lifted her hands cautiously. "Accident." He nodded once his jaw clenched. "A car crash. She survived, but she lost her hearing. At first, she tried to fight it. I learned her language. I thought if I stood with her, we could build something new. But grief and silence, they swallowed her." His gaze fell, the shadows under his eyes deepening. She became sick. Her body could not bear the weight, and one morning she was gone. The matter-of-fact tone of his words could not mask the grief beneath them. Clara felt her own hands tremble as she signed softly, "I am sorry." He glanced at her, something fragile breaking through the steel. "Do not be. I am the one who failed her." Clara shook her head violently, her eyes stinging. "No, you tried. You learned. You loved. That is not failure." For a heartbeat, he looked as though he might argue, but then he turned back to the water, silence wrapping around them again. Clara watched him, her heart aching with an unfamiliar weight. She had always known loneliness, the sting of isolation, the cruel glances of people who saw her as incomplete. But Damien carried a different kind of solitude, one carved by loss so deep it had reshaped him. She realized then why he signed with such precision, why his hands moved with the certainty of long practice. He had learned for someone he loved, and when she was gone, he had buried that part of himself. Until Clara. The thought unsettled her. She was supposed to be a stand-in, a pretend partner, nothing more. Yet in his eyes she had become a reminder of someone irreplaceable, and that knowledge twisted inside her. They stood there until the chill drove them back to the car. Neither spoke during the ride, but the silence was different, heavier. Clara sat with her hands folded tightly, staring at the blur of passing lights. She could feel the echo of his confession, pressing against her ribs, mingling with her own guarded heart. Back at her apartment, he walked her to the door. For a moment he hesitated, his gray eyes searching hers. And she wanted desperately to sign something that would ease the pain she had seen in him. But her hands would not move. Instead, she whispered softly, the words uneven. "Thank you for telling me." He inclined his head almost imperceptibly, then turned and left the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. Clara closed the door and leaned against it, her chest rising and falling with the weight of what she had learned. Alone in her small space, she pressed her palms to her face, trying to still the rush of emotions. She told herself this was dangerous, that stepping closer to his hidden wounds meant stepping into a place she could not escape. Yet even as fear whispered, her heart refused to retreat. That night, Clara could not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment his hands had spelled out the story of Sophia. She thought of the strength it took to share that pain and the trust it implied. For a man who trusted no one, who built walls so high, the world could only speculate about his heart. He had let her glimpse the scars he carried. And now she was no longer sure if she could keep her own heart untouched. The next morning she sat at her desk at the foundation, staring at a half-finished design. Her colleagues whispered nearby, their lips forming questions about her sudden presence at Damien's side. But she ignored them. All she could see was his face. On that bridge, the weight of his grief etched into every line. She realized then that her role in this pretense had already shifted. She was not only protecting his image or shielding herself from mockery. She was standing beside a man whose soul was fractured, whose silence ran as deep as her own. And whether she liked it or not, her heart was beginning to answer him. The weeks that followed moved in a blur of dazzling events and secret glances, but underneath the glitter, Clara began to notice cracks that unsettled her. She had continued her quiet work as a graphic designer for the Community Music Foundation, the place where she had always found purpose in shaping posters and visual campaigns for concerts she could not hear. Numbers were never her favorite, but when the director asked her to prepare layouts for the annual financial report, she took the spreadsheets home, determined to make the data presentable. Late one night, her small apartment lit only by the glow of her laptop, she began to notice discrepancies. Donation totals did not match previous records, expense lines seemed inflated, and certain entries appeared twice with different amounts. Clara frowned, her eyes narrowing as she compared documents. Something was wrong. Over the following days, she double-checked figures, cross-referenced old files, and even contacted a volunteer accountant she trusted. The conclusion was unavoidable. Money had been disappearing, siphoned quietly out of the foundation's accounts. The name that surfaced on several linked transfers stopped her breath. Cross Media Holdings, Damien's company. Clara stared at the screen, her heart slamming against her ribs. Could it be a mistake? Was it possible that his company was being used without his knowledge? Or was the man who had signed "I Hear You" into her life nothing more than another mask, another powerful figure willing to exploit charity for profit? Fear and disbelief twisted inside her. She wanted to confront him, yet dread held her back. If it was true, everything between them was a lie. If it was false, would he forgive her suspicion? The next time she saw him was at a private dinner with potential investors. He looked immaculate as always, his gray eyes sharp, his voice carrying calm authority. To everyone else, he was the embodiment of control, but to Clara his presence felt suddenly dangerous. She sat beside him smiling when expected, her hands folded tightly under the table to keep them from trembling. Throughout the night, Damien glanced at her with quiet assurance, offering a sign here and there to steady her when she looked lost in the swirl of conversations. Each gesture only deepened the conflict in her chest. How could a man who defended her so fiercely also be capable of betraying so many? That night, after he dropped her at her apartment, she lingered at the door, searching his eyes for answers she could not voice. He tilted his head, signing softly. "Something troubles you." She hesitated, then shook her head quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He watched her a moment longer, as though he sensed the lie, but finally nodded and left. Clara sank against the door, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to trust the man who had shown her a world beyond ridicule, who had shared his hidden wounds. But the numbers on the screen refused to fade. Days turned to restless nights. At the foundation, more questions rose among staff as whispers spread of missing funds. Clara kept silent, her heart torn between loyalty and suspicion. When she avoided Damien's calls, he appeared at her office, unannounced his presence, towering in the small space. Her colleagues stared in awe as he stood by her desk, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," his lips formed, and then he signed it for her, again slower. Outside on the street, he faced her frustration flickering in his eyes. "You have been distant. Why?" Clara struggled, her hands trembling as she signed back. "There are things I cannot explain." He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Then try." She shook her head, unable to confess what she had found. If she was wrong, the accusation would destroy everything. If she was right, then the man she was falling for was a fraud. The silence between them stretched heavy and suffocating. Damien finally exhaled sharply, anger masked by restraint. "When you are ready to tell me, I will be here. But know this, Clara, I do not forgive betrayal." His words cut deeper than he knew. That night she cried into her pillow, her chest aching with a pain that felt like it might never end. Soon after, the media erupted with headlines. Anonymous sources claimed the Music Foundation had mismanaged millions, hinting that Damien himself had orchestrated it to funnel money into his empire. Clara's heart sank as photographs of her with him at galas and dinners flashed across the screen, the captions cruel. "Deaf girl as PR shield, companion or cover-up." Her phone buzzed with messages, colleagues whispering if she knew if she had been part of it. The betrayal she had feared seemed confirmed in every flashing headline. When she finally saw Damien again, it was at his penthouse, the city sprawling in glittering lights behind him. He stood by the window, his posture rigid, his face carved from stone. Clara stepped inside, her hands shaking. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You believe them, do you not?" The accusation in his voice made her flinch. "I saw the numbers she signed desperately. The money led back to your company." His expression darkened, anger flaring. "And you never asked me. You simply assumed." She shook her head, tears spilling. "I wanted to trust you, but I could not ignore it." His voice hardened, each word deliberate. "Trust does not survive with doubt at its core. You think I used you just like they did at the Gala. Is that it?" Clara's breath caught his words, cutting open old wounds. She lifted her hands, signing in broken motions. "Maybe you only needed me to distract them. Maybe I was never more than a shield." For the first time, she saw something break in his composure. Pain, sharp and unguarded, flickered across his face before the mask slammed back into place. He turned away, his shoulders stiff. "Then perhaps we should end this charade." The words felt like knives. Clara's knees weakened, but she forced herself to nod. Without another sign, she fled into the night, the cold air burning her lungs. Back in her apartment, she collapsed onto her bed, sobbing until exhaustion pulled her under. She had thought she understood loneliness, but nothing compared to the emptiness of losing him. The days that followed were a storm Clara could not escape. Newspapers screamed headlines that twisted her stomach each time she glimpsed them on glowing screens in shop windows, or whispered from the lips of strangers on the subway. Damien Cross accused of embezzlement through charity funds. Deaf girlfriend, just a convenient disguise. Photographs of them together, splashed across glossy covers, his hand on her back. Her smile nervous under the camera flash. She could not leave her apartment without feeling eyes on her, judging, mocking. Even at the foundation, colleagues who once teased her now stared with thinly veiled suspicion, whispering cruel questions. Had she known all along? Was she helping him cover his crimes? Clara's world shrank to the four walls of her apartment, where the silence felt heavier than ever, pressing down, until even her own thoughts seemed unbearable. She avoided Damien, though his name filled every headline. The scandal was growing, investors pulling back, reporters circling like vultures. Yet deep inside, she longed for him, for the steady hand on her back, the eyes that once told her she was not invisible. That longing warred with the betrayal she could not shake, leaving her torn between love and anger, trust and fear. Then came the photograph that broke her completely. She opened her phone one morning to see an image plastered across every news site. Damien in a boardroom, standing tall but flanked by advisors, his expression cold. The caption read, "CEO denies allegations, insists companion knew nothing." Clara stared at the screen, her heart shattering. Companion, not partner, not beloved, not even friend. Companion. She had believed foolishly that she meant more. Tears blurred her vision as she flung the phone aside. She could not decide which hurt worse, the possibility that he was guilty or the certainty that he did not need her anymore. That evening she sat on her couch with the curtains drawn, the room dark except for the faint light from the city beyond. She thought of the first night at the gala, of his hands forming those impossible words, "I hear you." How cruel that memory felt now, how like a promise broken before it had a chance to bloom. A knock startled her. For a moment, hope leapt in her chest, but when she opened the door, it was not Damien. It was a reporter, her face sharp with hunger. Clara Hayes, can you comment on your relationship with Mr. Cross? Were you aware of the missing funds? Do you regret standing beside him? Clara slammed the door, her chest heaving. She sank against the wood, shaking with rage and grief. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Only silence, always silence. She pressed her fists against her chest, tears running freely. The next day at the foundation, things grew worse. Richard Hale, the suave vice president, who had always eyed Clara with a mixture of disdain and forced politeness, called her into his office. His lips-shaped words she read with dread. Your association with Cross puts us all at risk. People are asking questions. Perhaps you should take some time away. His eyes gleamed too pleased. Clara left the office, trembling humiliation burning through her. They saw her as guilty by association, a liability, not a woman who had given years of work. That night she walked home alone, the city lights blurring as tears refused to stop. She wanted to shut it all out, to curl into the small safety of her apartment, but loneliness was sharper now. She had known isolation all her life, but this was worse. It was rejection, amplified betrayal from the only man she had begun to trust. Days stretched into weeks. The scandal spiraled, and Clara's name became tied to Damien's in every cruel headline. People online mocked her, calling her the silent puppet, the deaf distraction. She tried not to read, but the words found her anyway, each one carving deeper wounds. Then one evening, her phone buzzed with a message she had not expected. It was Damien. Just 3 words lit up the screen. We need to talk. Clara stared, her heart thundering. She wanted to ignore it, but something in her would not let her. Against her better judgment, she agreed. They met at his penthouse, the city spread out below, in cold glitter. He stood at the window, shoulders taut, his expression unreadable. Clara entered cautiously, her hands clutched together. He turned, eyes stormy. You believe them, he said, his lips forming the words with accusation. She lifted her hands, her motions jerky. I saw the records. The money leads back to you. He stepped forward, anger sharp in his face. And you think I used you. That all of it was nothing. Tears spilled as she signed furiously. You brought me in to cover for you, to distract. You never meant a word. His face twisted pain, flickering before the mask slammed down. He spoke coldly. Then perhaps we are finished. The words felt final, like a door slamming on her heart. Clara staggered back, her vision blurred. She signed weakly, I was foolish to believe. He turned away, and she fled, choking on sobs that seemed endless. Back in her apartment, she collapsed, the weight of everything crushing her. She remembered his hands telling her she was harmony, his voice softer than the world deserved. She remembered his confession on the bridge, the grief of losing Sophia. And now it all lay in ruins. Her phone buzzed with more messages, headlines, screaming the city, indifferent to her breaking heart. Clara curled into herself, tears soaking her pillow. She thought she had known loneliness before, but she had never felt this, the sharp agony of being discarded, of realizing that trust had been nothing more than an illusion. Outside the city glittered, but inside her small apartment, only silence remained, heavy and merciless. In that silence, Clara whispered words no one could hear, not even herself. I hear you, Damien, but do you hear me? The scandal had not only wrecked Clara's heart, but also painted a target on her back. She returned to the foundation late one evening, determined to gather proof that would clear her own name. convinced now that the missing funds had roots deeper than Damien himself. The office was dark, nearly empty, only the hum of distant traffic seeping through the windows. Clara logged into the system, her fingers trembling as she sifted through records. Hours passed until she discovered something buried in the file's transactions, approved not by Damien, but by Richard Hale, the vice president. His name appeared again and again, hidden under layers of manipulation. Clara's chest tightened. He was the one. The weight lifted from her heart at the realization, but it was quickly replaced by fear. If she knew, he might know that she knew. The creak of a door behind her froze her blood. She turned slowly to see Richard standing there, his smile sharp, his eyes cold. "Working late, Clara." His lips formed the words clearly enough for her to read, and dread coursed through her veins. She backed away from the desk, but he stepped closer. "Curiosity is dangerous, especially for someone like you." He gestured mockingly to his ears, his voice dripping with cruelty she could feel even without hearing. Deaf girls should not meddle in things beyond their reach. Before she could react, 2 men appeared, his hired muscle blocking the exit. Panic surged as they grabbed her arms and dragged her out into the night. She fought twisting, but their grip was iron. They shoved her into a waiting van, the city lights blurring as fear choked her. Hours later, she found herself locked in a dim warehouse, the air damp and heavy. Richard loomed above her, smirking. "You think anyone will believe you? You cannot hear, you cannot speak for yourself. Who will trust a story from you over mine?" Clara's hands shook, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream, but only silence came. She thought of Damien, then of his gray eyes and the way he had once signed words that had healed her. Tears stung her eyes as despair threatened to crush her, but she refused to give up. She spotted her phone half hidden on the ground, where one of the men had tossed her bag. Inch by inch, she shifted, stretching her foot until she dragged it closer. With trembling fingers, she unlocked it, typing a desperate message. Before one of the guards noticed, the phone was ripped from her hands and smashed against the wall. Her hope shattered with it. Richard crouched low, sneering. "You should have stayed invisible, Clara. Now you will be the reason he finally falls." He lifted a knife, the glint of metal catching the dim light. Clara's breath came fast, her mind racing. She thought of the Gala, of being humiliated, of Damien appearing like a shadow and signing those impossible words. "I hear you." She clung to the memory, refusing to surrender. Suddenly, shouts echoed from outside. The guards stiffened, exchanging glances. The warehouse door burst open, light flooding in, and there he was, Damien Cross, flanked by police officers. His presence like a storm. His eyes locked on Clara, fierce and unyielding. Richard seized her, pressing the knife against her throat. "One move and she dies." He snarled his lips, forming the words Clara read with terror. Damien raised his hands slowly, his gaze steady, his movements deliberate. From across the room, he signed the words she had once thought she would never see again. "I hear you." Always. Clara's tears spilled, her chest aching as hope surged through her. She shook her head weakly, but his eyes told her to trust him. In a blur of motion, Damien lunged forward, tackling Richard, the knife clattering to the ground. Chaos erupted as police swarmed in, restraining the guards. Clara collapsed against the wall and was trembling, watching as Damien fought with a desperation that revealed everything he had kept hidden. Moments later, Richard was dragged away in handcuffs, cursing, his eyes venomous. The warehouse fell silent except for Clara's ragged breaths. Damien dropped to his knees beside her, his hands cupping her face with uncharacteristic gentleness. His lips moved, his voice low, but more importantly, his hands signed each word. "You are safe now." She clung to him, sobs shaking her body. For the first time since the scandal began, she felt truly seen, truly protected. She signed back with trembling fingers, "You came for me." His eyes softened, pain and love interwoven. "I will always come for you." The words broke something inside her. All the walls she had built crumbled as she buried her face against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her. Hours later, after statements were given and the police confirmed Richard's crimes, Damien insisted on taking her back himself. In the car, he sat close, his hand wrapped around hers, refusing to let go. Clara leaned against the seat, exhaustion pulling at her, but her mind replayed the moment he had signed across the room, the raw promise in his eyes. She realized then that what bound them was no longer pretense. It was something real, something neither of them could deny. Yet as the city lights passed outside the window, a new fear stirred in her. They had survived danger, but could their hearts survive the truth? She glanced at him, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you," she signed softly. He squeezed her hand, his gaze steady on hers. "Do not thank me, just stay." Clara's breath caught. She looked away quickly, her heart pounding. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she let herself believe in the promise of his words. And for the first time in weeks, the silence around her felt like peace instead of prison. The morning after the rescue, the city awoke to headlines that carried a different tone. Richard Hale arrested in embezzlement scandal. Evidence clears cross-media holdings. Photographs showed Richard in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage, and beside those images ran the story of Clara Hayes, the deaf designer who had risked her safety to expose the truth. Clara sat in Damien's penthouse, wrapped in a blanket, far too fine for her simple frame, staring at the television as words scrolled across the screen. For weeks she had been mocked and dismissed her name, dragged through mud, but now the world was forced to see her differently. She was not a pawn, not a distraction. She was the one who had seen what others missed. Still, the relief did not come easily. Her chest ached with the memory of accusations flung between her and Damien, of trust broken by doubt. She glanced at him across the room. He stood at the window, his posture tense as though carrying the weight of every eye in the world. When their gazes met, his expression softened but only slightly. He crossed the room, lowering himself to sit beside her. His hands moved slowly, deliberately. "You saved me." Clara shook her head. "Signing back, I only saw what was there. You were the one who believed me when no one else did." Damien's eyes darkened with something deeper, a mix of regret and longing. "I should have believed you sooner," he signed, then added aloud. "I let anger blind me. I thought you doubted me like everyone else." Clara's hands trembled as she answered, "I did doubt. I was afraid. I thought I was only a shield to you." He reached for her, then his hand warm over hers, his grip steady. "No, you were never a shield. You were the only truth I had left." Her breath caught tears stinging her eyes. The weight of weeks of pain pressed between them, yet in that moment it began to dissolve. Later that afternoon, Damien held a press conference, cameras flashing as the world demanded to hear from the man once accused. Clara stood just off stage, her knees weak but her spine straight. Damien approached the podium dressed in a simple black suit. No tie, his gray eyes sharp as steel. He spoke with clarity, his voice resonant. For weeks, lies have clouded the truth. Today that ends. The evidence is clear. Richard Hale betrayed the foundation, not me, not Clara Hayes. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. And Clara is not a prop. She is not a mask to hide behind. She is the person who reminded me that music is not only heard with the ears, but felt with the heart. She is my harmony. The words rang out, and for a moment, silence fell over the reporters. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping free. The cameras turned toward her, catching her trembling smile, the raw emotion in her eyes. When Damien stepped back from the podium, he came directly to her, ignoring the shouts of questions. He took her hand before everyone, his grip firm, unyielding. In the photographs that flooded the world afterward, there was no mistaking the truth. This was not performance, not pretense. It was a declaration. That evening, back in the quiet of his penthouse, Clara sat with him on the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the lights below, a blur of gold and white. She signed softly. "You did not have to say those things." Damien turned toward her, his expression gentler than she had ever seen. "I did, because they are true." She swallowed hard, her chest tight. "I do not know if I can live in your world." She signed, her hands unsteady. "It is too big, too cruel." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then we will build our own world. Small, honest, and ours." The words broke through the last of her walls. Tears spilled freely as she leaned into him, letting his arms wrap around her, letting herself believe that perhaps love could be found even in the aftermath of betrayal. For the first time since their story began, Clara felt not like an outsider looking in, but like someone who belonged. And for Damien, the man who had carried silence since losing Sophia, the weight of grief lifted enough for him to breathe again. That night, as they stood together, watching the city fade into stars, both knew their lives would never be the same. What had begun as pretense had become truth, and the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of a music only they could hear. The weeks after Richard's arrest blurred into a rhythm Clara had never imagined for herself. There were meetings with lawyers, apologies from those who had mocked her letters from strangers, who wrote to say they finally understood that silence was not emptiness. Yet even as the noise of the world grew louder, Clara found herself cocooned in a quieter, more intimate melody. Damien no longer kept her at the edge of his life. Instead, he drew her closer each day, inviting her to stand beside him in boardrooms and at charity events, not as an accessory, but as a partner. And when the cameras were gone and the suits vanished, he cooked her pasta in his kitchen, badly overboiled, but endearing in its clumsiness. One evening, as the first blush of spring painted the skyline, Clara stood at the balcony of his penthouse, watching the city hum beneath her. Damien approached quietly, sliding an arm around her waist. She turned and saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not the cold steel of the CEO, nor the grief of the widower, but the raw, unguarded gaze of a man who had chosen to love again. His hands moved slowly, deliberately. No more pretending. Clara's breath hitched as she signed back. "Are you sure?" His lips curved faintly. "I have never been more sure." The wedding came sooner than either of them expected. There was no cathedral, no grand ballroom, no 1,000 flashing cameras. Instead, it was held in a small riverside garden, where roses climbed trellises and the breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs. The guest list was short Emily Cross, who hugged Clara like a sister, a handful of loyal staff, and several close friends who had weathered the storm. Clara wore a simple white dress that hugged her frame gently and shimmered when the sunlight struck it. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, a crown of small blossoms tucked above her ear. She held a bouquet of wild flowers, not roses, imported from abroad, because she wanted to carry something that spoke of simplicity and truth. Damien stood waiting at the end of the aisle, dressed in a tailored suit more modest than his usual armor of power. His eyes followed her every step, gray depths brimming with an emotion that made her knees tremble. As Clara walked, she caught sight of the very colleagues who had once mocked her. They had come invited by Emily, who believed in reconciliation. Their faces were softened, now touched by shame and awe. Clara did not look away, and for once she did not feel small. She felt radiant seen. The officiant spoke in calm tones, but Clara barely heard the words. Her world had narrowed to Damien's hands, reaching for hers, to the steady pressure of his fingers, closing around hers, as if anchoring her to something eternal. He signed gently as he spoke his vows aloud, so every guest would understand. I once thought music ended when silence fell. But you showed me that silence can carry the loudest truths. I promise to stand beside you, to believe you, to fight with you and for you. You are my harmony. Clara's vision blurred with tears as she signed her response. I once thought I was invisible, a shadow in rooms too bright for me. But you saw me. You heard me when no one else did. I promise to walk with you even when the world turns cold, to trust you even when doubt tempts me, and to never let silence be a wall between us. I am yours. The officiant smiled, voice warm. You may kiss the bride. Damien leaned in, brushing his lips softly over hers as the guests rose in applause. Clara clutched his lapels, her heart soaring as though every note of every song ever written pulsed inside her veins. When the kiss broke, Damien whispered against her ear in sign and in words both. This is forever. The evening unfolded with laughter and warmth. Lanterns strung across the garden, casting golden light. Instead of a band, they hired a small string quartet. And though Clara could not hear the music, she felt its rhythm in the vibrations. Through the wooden floor, in the pulse of Damien's hand against hers, as they moved slowly together. She rested her cheek against his chest, eyes closed, feeling the steady beat of his heart. That was music enough. Later, as fireworks bloomed above the river, Clara stood with Damien on the balcony of the estate. The sky burst in colors that mirrored the storm of emotions inside her. She thought of the girl who once sat humiliated at a gala table, mocked for what she could not hear. She thought of the man who had lost his wife to tragedy and buried himself in ice. And she thought of how two broken melodies had found each other and created something whole. Damien slid a small velvet box into her palm. She opened it to find not another ring but a fountain pen engraved with her name. Her throat tightened as she looked up at him. For the stories you will still tell, he said softly. For the truths you will still uncover. For the life we will write together. Clara pressed the pen to her chest, her tears falling freely. No more pretending, she whispered, signing it slowly. This is real. Damien nodded, drawing her into his arms as the fireworks painted their silhouettes against the sky. In that moment, there was no deafness, no grief, no scandal. There was only love fierce and unshakable, echoing louder than any orchestra. And though the world would remember them as the billionaire CEO and the deft designer, Clara knew their truest legacy would be the harmony they found in each other's silence. If you are still here with me, then your heart has already walked every trembling step beside Clara Hayes, the girl who was mocked at a music gala, yet found a voice in silence, and beside Damien Cross, the billionaire who thought he had lost all music until he signed 2 words that changed everything. I hear you. Their journey was not a straight line of easy happiness, but a storm of humiliation, tenderness, betrayal, danger, and redemption, each twist tightening the strings of your own heart until you could almost feel it break. Remember that first night when Clara's hands shook under cruel laughter, when she wished the ground would swallow her whole, and then the stranger's steady hands told her she was not invisible. Remember the moments when their pretend arrangement threatened to shatter because truth felt too sharp, when she doubted his world and he doubted her faith, when love looked like a cruel trick destined to end in silence. And then remember the warehouse, the knife pressed against her throat, and the way Damien's hands signed from across the darkness, "I hear you always, even when the world refuses." Was your breath caught then? Did you feel your chest ache with hers? That ache is why stories like these matter. They remind us that the most powerful vows are not shouted in grand cathedrals, but whispered in broken moments when everything seems lost. They remind us that love does not erase pain, but walks through it, that silence is not emptiness, but another language of truth. And when at last Clara stood in white, when Damien took her hand before the world and promised no more pretending, were your eyes wet? Did you feel that sudden release, like after a long-held breath? That is not fiction alone. That is the heartbeat of every soul that has ever wanted to be seen, to be chosen, to be heard. If you felt something stir, do not keep it locked inside. Let your tears fall, let your smile rise, and share this story with someone who needs to believe again that love can heal, that even silence can sing. Leave a comment and tell me what part struck you deepest. Was it the cruel laughter that cut like a knife, or the pen in Clara's hand promising a life yet to be written? Tell me, because your voice keeps these stories alive. And if your heart whispered yes at any point in this journey, then carry that yes with you tonight. Carry it into your own life, into your own loves, and remember this one truth that Clara and Damien learned with every trial. No matter how dark the room, no matter how heavy the silence, when love is real, there is no need to pretend.